and it's a good welcome to episode 30 of the Malt Travel podcast. It's going to be slightly different this week. We mentioned last week in the episode 29 that we were going to be maybe trying to add some new formats and trying different things out in 2022. So this episode is just going to be myself, although I'm going to talk through a couple of sessions that we had together, Bruce and Nick, Malt Travel Trio, up in Yorkshire at the start of last week. So this also is a blog that I put together as well, and we'll put the blog links into the podcast website and also on our social media. So again, if you want to read through this and look at the pictures, again, we're going to try different formats. So for those who are watching this on YouTube, you'll see quite a few pictures that we took during the day. And then obviously, if you want to maybe listen to the podcast and then have a look at the blog, as I say, we'll put those links in as well. So the plan was that half term, and I was able to go up to Yorkshire. Unfortunately, I had a bit of a split half term in my family. So the wife and Finley, my youngest son, their half term didn't coincide with mine. So I had to go up to Yorkshire, have a few days in Yorkshire. So the plan was that we'd meet up with Nick and Bruce on Sunday. So Nick and I decided that we'd go off to Tadcaster, mainly because the wife and son were heading back over the Pennines, so they could drop us off on the way. And we've mentioned Tadcaster quite a lot, actually, on the podcast. Obviously, a big centre for brewing, often referred to as the Burton of the North. It's been quite a while since I was last in Tadcaster. I think the same for Nick as well. Bruce is a bit more of a regular visitor. Again, you'll have heard in recent podcasts, fortunately, obviously the breweries that dominate Tadcaster are the John Smith's Brewery, the Molson Coors Brewery, and more importantly for us, probably the Sam Smith's Brewery. And kind of one of the post-pandemic is that a lot of the Sam Smith's pubs currently are still not open because for lots of different reasons, the people who are running those pubs at the start of the pandemic kind of dropped off, have gone on done other things really. So I know they're training up new managers, and probably it was probably more so actually in the hometown of Tadcaster. The majority of Sam Smith's pubs are still closed. So anyway, that was the plan to start in Tadcaster, and then we were going to use the Coastliner bus, which we mentioned a few times, a great service between Leeds by York, Malton, and the East Coast, and then meet with Bruce in York. And we tried to do this on the Sunday, so there were one or two obviously logistical challenges we overcame, but hopefully it was a good day. Quite a few new pubs for one or two of us. And again, it was quite interesting to have a look around Tadcaster and work it through. So that was kind of the plan, really. It was also the day of the England-Italy rugby match, so we'd try and find a time to sit down, maybe watch a little bit of that game at least. And as I said, there were one or two pubs, certainly in York, that we have talked about, or that either one of us or a couple of us hadn't been in. So certainly for me, there were a couple of really good pubs that I will definitely be going back to as well. So it was a fairly early drop-off in quite a wet and miserable Tadcaster, where unfortunately we I just heard today on the news actually flooded again. You may know infamously it was hit by flooding a few years ago. In fact, we'll mention that as we go through this as well. So the idea was that we got free lift, so we got dropped off in Tadcaster. As I said, with it being a Sunday, unfortunately, obviously the pubs are open until 12, so we got there about 11. So we had a little bit of time to have a little wander around in what was a fairly steady drizzle. So we decided to have a quick walk up and down the town, see what was what. And as mentioned, it was quite depressing that it was obviously quite obvious that a lot of the Sam Smith's pubs, particularly the Bay Horse, the Royal Oak and the Falcon, were all looking very sad, tired and dark. And perhaps the biggest disappointment, I guess, is the kind of unofficial Sam Smith's tap, which is the White Horse and Griffin, which is quite a big pub that sits on Tadcaster High Street and kind of fronts the brewery, really. It's where the Shire horses and things are kept as well. Unfortunately, again, that was very, very close, which again is such a massive shame, really, because, obviously that's a very central point of Tadcaster history. So it was a shame, really. So again, for those who are able to see the pictures, either on the blog or on the YouTube, We got dropped off just to the north end of the town, and then we walked back in. And I think the brewery that probably dominates Tadcaster actually is now this Heineken John Smith's, which is kind of a very big and prominent brewery. You see the chimney for from the A64 and from the railway, etc. When you're going past Tadcaster, and it's a very impressive brewery. They've done, obviously there is, they've modernised it slightly, it's on the back, but again, that image that you get when you come into Tadcaster, especially from the south, is a very prominent Victorian, very solid-looking brewery. So John Smith's was showing some forms of life. There was a couple of lorries there dropping off malt. But again, I mentioned to Nick, you unfortunately don't get that smell of the malt and the hop, which I always remember when I was younger going to Tadcaster. Maybe that's kind of modern, maybe brewing methods, but you can't pretty much get away from John Smith's in the town. Although John Smith's now is, as we mentioned, has been through various different formats over the last 20 so years. Bath Charrington, and it's now Heineken. The John Smith's kind of logo, the green, the orange writing on the green, pretty much dominate the town, whether you're coming any way into it, really. There was a very discreet welcome to Heineken UK, which again is interesting. You don't see that again in looking at the picture there. You don't actually see that until you're quite close up to the John Smith's building itself. And there's some interesting features, from the original offices, original plaque. Again, are quite interesting to see as well, really. So that's kind of where we started. A quick walk around, bits you can walk around. Of course, it's interesting that the actual, Sam Smith's and John Smith's, again, like all good Yorkshire breweries, there is a family link there, and perhaps I'll cover that in a minute. But they also kind of sit side by side. In fact, they actually share a little kind of road together. I've got to say the Sam Smith's brewery was very, very quiet. Very, everything locked up, all the gates closed, not much going on. Didn't even see any smoke from anywhere as well. So it was very, very quiet on their side of Centre Lane. So Tadcaster is a fairly small town. Has quite a long history. Now it's a fairly nondescript town. I can just remember when I was younger, you had to go through Tadcaster if you're going to York or Leeds. You went through the town centre. But the new, when that was dual carriageway back in probably the 70s, 80s, the kind of fairly modern A64 now whisk you just one side. Although again, you can't kind of go along that road without missing the kind of the other side of John Smith's Brewery, which is by the river. Goes back to Roman times, when the road obviously up to York, or Iberacum as it was then. Obviously York was the capital of the north, the Roman legions, so a very important town. But the Romans actually named Tadcaster Calcarea, which is the Latin word for lime. And of course, there's an important link there as well, because the area has an abundance of limestone, which initially was very famous for the stone used in things like Tadcaster Brewery, but also big buildings like York Minster, and quite a lot of the kind of very prominent buildings in York were built using Tadcaster stone. But of course, the other thing about the limestone was it means that the water's quite special as well. So the local water is very rich in lime sulfate, which filters through limestone, and that creates this very good brewing liquor, very good brewing water, quite similar to, again, we talked about Burton-on-Trent in some of the earlier podcasts as well. And by 1341, there were already a lot of thriving breweries in Tadcaster. And in fact, Sam Smith still used one of the original wells, 85 foot down, to get their water for the brewing as well. So as I mentioned, a smallish town, does have an impressive heritage though. Tadcaster is first mentioned in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, written in the 9th century, where it appears as Tada, which is referring to a place where King Harold assembled his army and fleet before entering York and heading towards the Battle of Stamford Bridge back in 1066, when obviously they defeated the Viking army in the north, but then had to march all the way down south and meet the William the Conqueror and the Normans at Hastings. Obviously, hopefully you all remember your history. Unfortunately, they lost that one as well. The second part of the name Castra was an Anglo-Saxon, or is an Anglo-Saxon Roman word for a fort or wall settlement. So Tadcaster was basically the fort of Tada. Town is also mentioned in the 1086 Domesday Book as Tadcaster, and was later the site of a major civil war during the War of the Roses, and then later also the civil war between the Royalists and the parliamentarians. And it's also suggested that a building in Kirkgate, which is just off the main high street, now called the Ark, because there are two figures that are carved into kind of the wood trim on the roof. There's also a building where the Pilgrim Fathers met before they set off to find, well, not find, it's the wrong word probably, to set up the United States of America. Quite a few of the Pilgrim Fathers came from kind of this area of Yorkshire and Hull, and apparently met there as well. It's now called Morley Hall, and I think Tadcaster Council now have had it for a while as using it for their council office as well. So in 2022, Tadcaster does still have 3 breweries operating. Hence, and that's often why it gets that title, like kind of Burton of the North. The Tower Brewery is a little bit out of town, and that now is owned by Molson Coors. Tower Brewery, again, we've mentioned before because that actually it started off in York and then moved to Tadcaster in the 1800s. I did try and find out what is brewed at Molson Coors in Tadcaster, but again, it's quite hard to find much information really. And I guess it's a kind of a needs operation at Tadcaster now. Whatever they need in their vast range, that's probably what they brew to make sure that they can, they get all those various different lagers, etc. out. I'm guessing they might brew some Doombal there. I know they do claim that it's all brewed at Sharps Brewery down in Rock, but again, having been to that brewery, it's still quite a small brewery. I'm not quite sure they could get all that Doombal. I mean, every other pub in the UK has got them on a hand pump. So anyway, it's a very modern complex now, and you don't really see it actually in Tadcaster town. There is a tower of sorts still, and apparently there is still some remnants from the original Victorian brewery, but it's a fairly modern setup now as well. Interesting. I did a bit of research about this, and they found out that locally, actually, they called this brewery the Snobs Brewery because of the aloofness of the original owners. Apparently, when the original brewer sold out, Hothams and Co., who moved from York, it was bought by a trio of fairly rich dandies, businessmen who were more interested really in horse racing and obviously spending their money. So apparently, they very rarely visited Tadcaster and just really saw it as an investment. So say it was known locally, I'd say the Snobs Brewery. Apparently, all 3 were also Old Etonians, which can explain that as well a little bit as well. So as I mentioned, it's John Smith's brewery that does dominate the town. A very impressive building. And obviously it was John Smith who was the original brewer in Tadcaster. But as I mentioned, like all good Yorkshire brewing families, there's a story of family fallouts and one-upmanship. The original John and Sam Smiths were actually brothers. But the real villain seems to be the third brother, William. On John, I think John was the eldest, and in his will, he said that when he died, he would like the brewery to kind of go to both brothers and for them to carry on brewing. But William had other ideas. So he actually moved from the original brewery, the old brewery, which is now Sam Smith's, moved next door where another brewery had set up and took all the brewing kit with them. So Sam did inherit the John Smith's brewery, but it was an empty brewery with no brewing kit in it. And therefore that's where the split came, a little bit like the later story of Theakston's and Black Sheep. The same thing happened this side of Yorkshire as well. Again, the irony perhaps is that obviously Sam Smith's are they remain the only independent brewery in Tadcaster, and of course John Smith, as we mentioned, have been through a variety of mega buyouts from Courage in 1970, Scottish Newcastle in 1995. And Heineken in 2008, and therefore the name of John Smith is slightly declined, particularly in I guess if you're outside of Yorkshire. In fact, we were all talking about it's really you don't often see John Smith Smooth anymore. It's very hard to find, and I'm guessing that Amstel and Kronenbourg 1664, which are the kind of the Heineken UK, one of their biggest brands, is probably what's being brewed there. It is a big brewery. It's got 30 million litre capacity. So that means that it still is one of the UK's biggest breweries as well. So as I mentioned, the water was quite important for all brewing in Tadcaster, but it was also the kind of beer that they were trying to brew as well. So what's referred to as bright water, which is this quite bitter, I guess, but quite refreshing with those sulfates in it. And that, as Tadcaster was developing that type of lager, the pale ale, of course, which we've mentioned before, began to take over in popularity from the stouts and the porters, which had traditionally been the common man's drink, and probably early in the 17th century. It also ties in, of course, with the massive industrialisation of nearby West Yorkshire, Leeds, Huddersfield, that whole area there. Again, we talked about in a couple of our previous podcasts. So there was this very large, ready, thirsty population, pretty much on the doorstep of Tadcaster. You're on a navigable river, so a lot of things were in Tadcaster's favour really. But Taddy beer, pale, bright, bitter, refreshing with a lowish ABV, very much became the kind of drink of choice if you were hot, sweaty cotton, woolen miller, owner, steel foundry, or coal mine. Those pale beers, like in Burton, became it as well. Really interesting that a lot of craft beers in America, a lot of craft beer breweries in America, still talk about Sam Smith's actually being one of their main kind of inspirations and the range of beers that they grow as well. So, as I mentioned, John Smith's dominates the skyline, and you probably have to look a little bit hard in Tadcaster actually to see Sam's. It's kind of tucked away a little bit off the high street, a little bit down around the back. As always, there's hardly any signage which tells you that. But when me and Nick were there, we literally had to stare through a couple of windows to decide if this was part of the Sam's Brewery, because they do share one street together. And again, we did see a couple of the Sam Smith's posters in the building, so we presume that was. The black chimney kind of is the clue. Again, it's a Victorian tower type brewery. But I say it's all quite, it's you could get to see a lot. I think probably what that does is it probably just creates more of those kind of Willy Wonka type myths about Sam Smith's. Obviously, if you could get in the brewery, and again, I think they stopped doing tours now, you probably would see the famous Yorkshire squares, squares of Yorkshire stone and slate, where they kind of open ferment a lot of their beers. And apparently they're also still using the yeast strain that they first began brewing with back in the 1880s as well. So again, a very traditional brewery. There was another brewery in Tadcaster, and that was called Brames Brewery. And that stood kind of more towards where Sainsbury's is now, or by the side of the river there as well. And that was again a Victorian brewery, and that later merged with Wharfdale Brewing. And on doing that, they moved the brewing up to Wharfdale, which is a little bit further up north in Yorkshire. Tadcaster also at the news more recently, as I mentioned, with flooding in 2015, which was so severe that unfortunately the main road bridge that connects the east and the west side of the town was swept away. And this was quite a big thing. The Sainsbury's and one supermarket is on one side of the river. Things like the doctors and the grammar school, the high school are on the other side of the river. There was proposals from the council to put a temporary road bridge together, but you've guessed it, one person objected, not because he owed quite a lot of the land around there, and that was Humphrey Smith, who was the owner of Sam Smith. So he objected. Unfortunately, all they could do was put in a very small pedestrian bridge. People could walk from one side of the river to the other, but it was a 13-mile detour to drive around to the next point where you get over the river, which is a fair way, really. And actually, the bridge wasn't finally repaired until 2017. So it took over 2 years, to get that bridge fully reopened again. Now, if you go across now, you can still see some of the new bits of kind of stone in the middle there as well. It appears that, again, that's nothing new. I don't know if I've seen a couple of photos. St. Mary's Church, which kind of dominates Tadcaster on the other side of the breweries. That actually apparently in 1857 was taken down stone by stone and rebuilt further back in the river because they're concerned about floods as well. And as I mentioned, unfortunately, just looking on the news tonight, we recording this on the 21st of Feb. Again, unfortunately, on the national news, Tadcaster again is flooded with the river that's come up. In fact, we've driven past there today on the way back from the auction. It was, pretty huge flooding. One legacy of that is that there is a pub now in Tadcaster called the Broken Bridge. It was formerly Leeds Arms, a little bit. It's to the west of York side of the bridge. It does say that it's got a range of cask beers, although there are quite a lot of large Sky Sports banners outside, which sometimes put me off slightly. And maybe the Amstel and the Kronenberger are more to liking. However, maybe you should have a visit, maybe have a look. And it's quite handy because the coastliner does pop outside as well. It is quite a nice town, Tadcaster, and it did say The Guardian in 2015 in one of its kind of regular "Why Move Here" features. They read out, Tadcaster is a small market town, not making much buzz. If you head there, you won't need to look for it so much as sniff it out, since Tad has been dominated by brewing for around 800 years, thanks to limestone water. As a result, the town may smell a little fruity, but it's actually quite pleasant. The Snobs Brewery still employs a cooper, a signwright, and an ostler. Its Shire horses make local deliveries 5 days a week. If this sort of thing was happening anywhere near London, they'd be spaffing on about it in their artisan values and chunky hipster typeface and hiking up their prices. As it is, friendly people of Tad doing what they've always done, just get on with it. So that's quite a nice little summary, I think, of a fairly down-to-earth town, which in normal towns has a range of very good pubs. So again, if you're watching on YouTube, what you can see in front of this is the old brewery. This is kind of the high street base of the brewery itself, and to the left there is the Angel and White Horse, which again is their kind of tap really as well. So again, there's some quite fine architecture as well. So as I mentioned, back to our visit then. So we kind of sorted across to Sainsbury's, had a look at what the offer was in Sainsbury's. Again, not surprising, maybe there was no Tadcaster beers at all. There were a few Yorkshire beers available, mainly Black Sheep and Saltaire, but these were heavily outnumbered by a range of Kent beers and beers from the southwest. So it was typical, really. We to kill a bit more time, we nipped in Costa, which is housed in the NatWest, or former NatWest Bank. It's quite nice because actually I took that picture out of Costa window, because Costa is directly opposite the old brewery as well, which was fine. So we did a little bit of work up front, and I picked out that the Howden Arms was one of the soundsmiths that was still open. This is a very small, traditional one-room pub. It is actually directly opposite the John Smith's Brewery. In fact, those pictures that we showed you earlier on, again for those on YouTube, this is directly the gates to the very big John Smith's Brewery. So anyway, checking the time, we found out that it was open at 12 o'clock. So we arrived there about 12:03, and very gladly the door was open, and in we went. So there was already one chap in there already, took it into his tally lager, and a welcoming barman. Although a bit disappointing, there was a very limited choice. There was basically old brewery bitter, tally lager, or double four lager, and that was it. I asked if he'd got any bottles. I was particularly after a bottle of India Ale, which I've been looking at, which one thing that Rains at South Smiths do. We're not the bloody angels, was the barman's response. I'll say, well, at the moment, nobody's either, really. But then he did show us, and he said, look, all I've got in the fridge at the moment is orange juice and lemonade. We're just not getting anything from the brewery. So there we go. Anyway, Nick went for an old brewery bitter on cask. And I'm not quite, I've got off a little bit an old brewery bitter. I think you've got to drink it quite regularly to get the taste. It's a bit chalky. So I opted instead, I had a double four lager, which is Sam's, it was keg, but it was double fermented lager, which again is very nice. So the Howden Arms is from around about 1891. The What pub description is that it's a traditional pub with a comfortable interior around a central bar with a blazing fire in the winter. Fortunately, the fire wasn't lit when we were in there. Dogs are allowed inside the room. Off the right as you went to the pub, pictures of Tadcaster of old adorn the walls around the pub. However, we did notice that when we walked in the pub, there was quite a stern message now as you go in straight away. The notice board saying that dogs were no longer welcome in the pub, only in the beer garden, as were children, only allowed in the beer garden. And in both cases, they had to be in full control of their guardians. We've heard that I think the no dogs rule is a fairly recent directive from Humphrey in terms of his pubs as well. We did immediately stick to the no mobile phones, etc. In fact, that's on their beer mats now in Sam Smith's pub. And we did quite like the pickies that were kind of looking around. So unfortunately, didn't take any pictures inside there. So we decided that what we do is, as it was a very damp Sunday morning, we'd just have one more beer in Tadcaster, and then we'd jump on the bus and maybe get to York a little bit earlier than we said, really. So we again made the decision we want to move on to the Coach and Horses, which is again on the York side of the river. So took our glasses back. There was a few more guys then in the bar by then, kind of 12:30 on a Sunday. Again, mainly tucking into their taddy lagers. So definitely worth a visit if you want a traditional kind of one-room little boozer, worth going in there as well. So the Coach and Horses, which was formerly a John Smith's pub, it's now very proudly says it's a free house. Although again, it seemed to be that Theakson's beers were, as you can see there from the signage on YouTube, and the board outside, and there were Theakson's certainly beers in there as well. This is quite handy for us because it's right next to Tadcaster's little bus station. So again, you can have a beer in there and you can wait for the buses, which go about, I think, 5 to the hour on Sunday, and I think 5 to and 25 past. Quite a regular service actually to and from Leeds, York, etc. as well. And I say we mentioned that the Broken Bridge up the road, actually, they were also Theakson's as well. So interesting that Nick thought that maybe Theakson's had kind of particularly trying to get an angle into town where obviously the Smiths dominate. So that was interesting as well. So quite a large pub, the Coach and Horses. It's pretty much bang in the centre of Tadcaster. It looked like it was gearing up for Sunday afternoon, sort of Sunday lunches, sorry. Lots of different areas, different kind of rooms, quite comfy furniture. We actually ended up sitting in the room to the left of that door that Nick's entering there. And again, interesting, when we got in there, we mentioned there was Theakson's on, but actually we both went for a cask offer of Nailmaker Brewing Company and their Mosaic. We couldn't place the brew initially, but a little bit of logging into Untapped, and we found out that actually it's a micro brewery in Barnsley. So again, it was the first check-in for me for that brewery, and it was nice, a nice pint. I say we watched that, like the glasses grafted in Yorkshire, and we sat in there and just drank those one beers, and then we jumped on the coastliner to head towards York. As I mentioned, the coastliner heads then up through the kind of rest of Taddy High Street and gets on the A64, and doing so, it passes the Broken Bridge, or the Leeds Arms, as it was, as you go through there as well. So we sort of stay on the bus which takes you all the way through to York railway station. So it was still a fairly miserable day when we got off the bus there. It was discouraging to see that there were lots of coaches outside York Station, bus, what they call coach replacements. Obviously, a lot of the trains were obviously being cancelled, or there was roadworks going on. So we'd said we'd meet Bruce in about an hour's time, so we're a little bit early. So after a bit of persuasion, I managed to get Nick to get it going to the York tap, which we've mentioned again in a couple of podcasts. This is one of those Pivney taps that sits literally on the station itself, by the side of the platforms. It is quite a large space, lots and lots of beers. It is, as it says, a bit of a waiting room. So, I know what Nick says. It has got a bit of that kind of coming and going feel, but I think he was pleasantly surprised. The beer was on quite good form. There was a good choice. We kind of sat the York side rather than the station side, which is slightly more comfortable. There was a fire in. There was a kind of a good smattering of people, really. Yes, some people were coming and going, but obviously some people were coming for a drink as well. One side, it was mainly Timothy Taylor's beers. And again, for those of you watching, that's the picture you've got there behind Nick. I think the whole range nearly of Timmy Taylor's beers. We got from the other side, so I ended up having actually a pint of Marble Manchester Bitter, which was very, very good. And we both quite enjoyed it in there as well, really. So anyway, we managed to sit down, and then we worked out what we were going to do next. So again, we suggested we'd probably meet Bruce at the Acorn in about half an hour's time. And then we also both arranged that we'd get picked up to go back to Malton from the Malton is about 6 o'clock as well. So I said we quite enjoyed that. So a quick zip across York. Again, fairly steady. Again, I say unfortunately the weather wasn't great. And a quick zip up Micklegate. Quick detour to the Oxfam bookshop, where Nick got a couple of walking books about his next plan to go up to Lake District. Oxfam is across from the what's now called the Artful Dodger, but used to be one of our haunts. Walker's Bar, which is again named after Mrs. Walker, who ran the pub, and the nightclub next door actually as well. And that was one of the first pubs that got Theakson's beers in York as well. But anyway, unfortunately, it's changed slightly now. And so we headed towards up the cobbles, towards the Accor, which again, if you've listened to a couple of podcasts, you know, is quite a regular haunt for us all really in there. Again, they were just doing their Sunday lunches, so it was pretty busy. We were quite lucky actually to get the last table. You have to pre-book those Sunday lunches, so they look very nice, but unfortunately we couldn't order one because we hadn't pre-booked. So anyway, we settled down for some pints. Hopefully, we were going to get some Yankee Rooster in there, because again, that's always a place where they tend to have it on, but unfortunately they didn't today. So we ended up having in Ainsty Ales, which again is a local brewery. And then Bruce joined us there, so we had a quick catch-up. Again, for those who watch on YouTube, I'm not quite sure what Nick's going on about there, but Bruce is very nonplussed. probably because there was a telly behind me that had football on, maybe that's what it was. Interestingly, in the Acon, they've got some very interesting additional features to the talking of football, to the menu urinals, which have little holes in them, and you have to aim, and you have to aim a little ball, which definitely keeps your aim nice and straight as well. So from the Acon, we said we'll do kind of that circuit that we did, I think, back in episode 7, which is kind of the south of the river. And so we next head off to the Golden Ball, which isn't probably about 10 minutes walk from the Acon. So we mentioned this a couple of times again. It's a really great pub. Dates back to the 18th century again. It's got John Smith's all over it. It was John Smith's house initially. But now it not claims, it was York's first community cooperative run boozer. So again, a bit of a kind of save the pub community took it over. And again, multi-roomed, a great place day or night to be in, really. It was pretty steady for a Sunday afternoon. We went in the back room, the fire was on, the rugby was on. So it was fantastic as well. But again, it was interesting. There was a real kind of mixed clientele, really. One or two guys, obviously on their own, going through the Sunday papers in some of the kind of quieter rooms. A group of Americans, tourists outside in the kind of covered beer garden, then ourselves in there as well. Again, good range of beers as always. So it was an unlucky probably for me. And again, really impressed by the glasses powered by beer, which was good. The only downside was that they'd run out of pork pies and Scotch eggs, which is one of their specialities. So we were foodless in this pub, but we really enjoyed some good beer. Pleasant half an hour in there, really. England were already 21-0 up in rugby, so we decided that we'd move on. So moving on, another quick 10-minute so hike, and up to one of our favourites, which is to the Swan at the start of what is supposedly the finest independent street in England, Bishopthorpe Road, or Bishy Road for those who live in York. Again, this is a pub that's featured in quite a number of our episodes. About 3 o'clock now, so it's a little bit quieter when we arrived. Again, we got in the nice rear bar, got in the far corner, and I had a very nice pint of goose-sized spring Welsh ale. And Bruce was very happy there, as you see on his phone, because Villa had just had their equalising goal against Newcastle disallowed. So Bruce was quite happy as well. So again, another nice pint in there. Again, it was fairly quiet for a Sunday afternoon. So we thought we'd kind of head back into town then. So we were getting picked up at 6 o'clock. And good for me, because we had a couple of new ticks, really. We had wondered about going out to the Wellington, which is a Sam Smith's pub in Fulford, but it's a bit of a hike out. And again, the idea of maybe having some limited beer choice, which we've kind of seen in Tadcaster, put us off slightly as well. So instead, we said we'd go to the Seahorse. And the Seahorse, again, is a really interesting pub. It's a bit maroon now on kind of an island on the inner ring road. It kind of got roads going either side of it. It's quite close to the Barbican of York, if people know York. The Barbican is obviously snooker fame. Obviously a very old pub. It looks like it probably was a coaching inn. It still has actually got rooms upstairs as well. Of course, there's no TVs, because it's Sam Smith's pub. And there's quite a nice archway where obviously the carriages and the horses went as well. And you'll notice that Bruce always kind of rams on about pubs, and this pub has 4 open fires, which Bruce is always not very reluctant to tell everybody. And I will say that on the Sunday at about 3:30, there were indeed 4 fires blazing away, including the very nice Yorkshire range in the rear. Actually, we ended up in the parlour, which is on the left there, which is going quite a nice room. Had that to ourselves again, which is nice. And that had a lovely fire burning as well. Again, not much choice. They had no bottles either, just had organic lager. So actually, I stumped for a pint of light mild in here, which again was very nice and very cheap. Again, there was a big notice reminding us of the Sam Smith's pub about forbidding swearing. But it was quite nice, actually, just to kind of keep your phone in your pocket and just have a chat about things in general. And again, you might see some of those other photos. We do look like just teenagers all kind of rammed in our phones, really. And then 2 more pubs to go. So the next pub, again, was a brand new one for me. It's literally just across the road from the Seahorse, so quite a nice quick walk. And that was the Phoenix. So again, for those on watching on the slide, so on the slide behind here, there's some outside shots there of the Seahorse. It's very impressive decor outside. It's much more of a kind of a Victorian take on the Seahorse and perhaps Disney's. But again, yeah, interesting. And again, as I mentioned there, for those of you watching on YouTube, you can see that carriageway there where potentially the horses and carriage would have gone through. Again, obviously York was on the main road between the Great North Road between London and Edinburgh as well. I think I was reading somewhere it took something like 40 hours, I think, to London and 45 hours Edinburgh. So it's pretty much halfway. So obviously a big stopping off point for that as well. So again, Bruce has talked quite a lot about the Phoenix. Phoenix is just inside the walls, obviously the famous walls of York. This pub has a couple of very unwoke names in the past and some very unwoke pub signs, so I won't mention them here, but if perhaps you want to Google it, the current name was given it, I think, in the early 1900s, and it relies to the Phoenix Iron Foundry, which was fairly close. The Phoenix is a little bit of a York institution, really, and it was pretty buzzing on a Sunday afternoon. Every room, pretty much every table was full, and again, nice kind of murmur chatter going on. Lots of people's enjoying some really, really good beers. We were really looking that we got a in that main window. That again, if you're looking, there's Nick and Bruce going in. We got a table right by the fire in there, which is fantastic. And again, doubly good news. They also had pork pies left as well. So it was a turning point analog odyssey for me. And again, there's a very nice picture of Bruce tucking into one of those very nice pork pies, by a very nice roaring fire with some very nice beers as well. So yeah, really, really good. The Phoenix, would definitely recommend it. Not too far out the city centre. It's just past Brew York. So if you were heading out to us, or you want to call in at Brew York, then another 5 minutes would get you to the Phoenix as well. And it's quite atmospheric, right, literally on the foot of the walls that are kind of slightly just outside the pub as well. And you go through the gate. So very, very nice. And then to round off the day, we decided that we'd head back, and I said we were going to get picked up anyway. So we ended up back at Sean's Maltings. Again, we were probably in that in-between time. It was quite quiet, actually, the Maltings for Sunday. We're in kind of, 5:30. So I guess we're in that time of afternoon section of people not yet coming out. Again, another Yorkshire beer for me, which was a Kirkstall Jasper. So I think that was my 8-pint Yorkshire beer journey on the day. And a Lancastrian thrown in as well, just for good one. My Manchester, my marble bitter that I had at the tap. So all in all, a really good day. Really enjoyed having a look around Tadcaster. A bit perhaps disappointed in the pubs. If you were going to go, I'd definitely go on a nice day because there's some nice walks down by the river there. Hopefully, some more of those pubs will open, and particularly the Angel and White Horse, because that is a cracking pub to go into. And as I said, the added bonus is that if it is open, if you walk down their yard, often you can get to go and see the Shire horses that as we mentioned, Sam Smiths do out really. So another great day, a little bit spoilt by the weather, which has become a little bit theme really on our kind of three-way catch-ups. But a day of great beer and some really great pubs. Both, the ones in Tadcaster were great, but the ones in York were pretty special. So as you know, we have a bit of a soft spot there. So definitely a good pubury, and that's what kind of February has been this year to take it through as well. So hopefully we'll catch up with the lads, Bruce and Nick, next time we do a podcast together. Maybe get some of their feedback as well and have a think through it and talk a little bit about that and do some more planning. I think both Bruce and Nick may do, again, I think the plan is they'll do their own kind of monologue like I've done today, and we'll see how that goes. I say we're just kind of trying to find ideas really about keeping it fresh and obviously keeping people like yourselves entertained. So hopefully that's been a little ramble through that. As I said, I've also written this up as a blog. So if you want to have a read through that, again, we'll put the links in. And as always, if you've listened to the podcast, then again, it's also available on YouTube and vice versa as well. The YouTube version has got some nice pickies on it as well. The plan next time we kind of get together, which hopefully will be probably this next week, so the final week of February, is that obviously me and Nick need to catch up at New Year. We spent up in Northumberland, and particular in the town of Amble, which is a wonderful little coastal town. In fact, since we've been there, it's been on almost everybody cooking program. Hairy Bikers up there last week. So some really interesting pubs to talk about, and a very special brewery that we spent quite a bit of time as well. So that'll be the feature of our next podcast, which will be episode 31, a beery ramble around Amble in Northumberland. So till then, keep safe, enjoy your beers, and we'll catch up with you very, very soon.